The sound of a fork hitting polished marble should have been nothing, a slip, a small accident lost in the clatter of a busy dining room. But inside the Gilded Elm, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, that sound was a thunderclap. It cut through velvet whispers and crystal laughter like a shot in the night. Every head turned, every conversation faltered, and at the center of it all sat billionaire magnate Richard Callahan and the man who had let the silver fall. It wasn't clumsiness. It was theater. Callahan's smirk told the truth. He hadn't dropped the fork by accident. He had flung it with calculated contempt. His target wasn't the marble floor. His target was the young woman standing just a few feet away. Tray balanced on steady hands, her eyes widening, though her lips refused to tremble. Her name was Emily Carter. At 27, she had spent nearly a decade serving people like him. Men in bespoke suits, women in diamond bracelets, heavier than her paycheck and the endless parade of wealth that flowed nightly into the Gilded Elm. To them, she was invisible, just another uniform in black and white, just another voice asking, still or sparkling. But Richard Callahan wanted her to be visible tonight, and only for one reason: to break her. To prove to his guests, three powerful Japanese businessmen seated at his side, that the world bent to his will, even down to the smallest waitress. Emily stood her ground. She felt the velvet drapes behind her heavy as theater curtains closing in. Above her, chandeliers blazed with cold white light, every crystal a reminder that in this room there was no place to hide. Around her, conversations shifted into hushed whispers, the wealthy eager to see how the play would unfold. Her apron, crisp and white, felt suddenly like iron shackles against her waist. It wasn't just fabric, it was debt, medical bills, abandoned dreams, stitched into every fold. 5 years of holding this job had carved fatigue into her bones. Nights of rushing between polished tables had stolen the spark from her 20s, and yet, deep inside her chest, a spark remained. Few in that room knew that Emily Carter had once lived a different life. Years ago, before her father's passing and the avalanche of bills that followed, she had spent a year abroad in Kyoto. She had walked temple paths in autumn, breathed in the fragrance of moss gardens, and learned a language so rich in respect, it had reshaped how she saw the world. That secret tucked away, like an old photograph in a drawer, now stirred. She felt it press against her ribs, reminding her of who she had been before the apron, before the debt, before she had learned to bow her head in silence. Richard Callahan's smirk widened. He thought the sound of silver on marble was the beginning of her humiliation. He had no idea it was the beginning of his own. The heavy mahogany doors of the Gilded Elm swung open, and with them came a chill that cut straight through the hum of conversation. The chatter of hedge fund managers, the soft laughter of Broadway producers, even the clink of wine glasses, all of it faded into silence. People didn't just notice Richard Callahan's entrance. They braced for it. He was built like a storm contained in a man's frame. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a suit so sharply tailored it looked like it could cut glass. His silver tie gleamed beneath the chandelier's light, and his pale blue eyes swept the room with the cold confidence of a conqueror surveying his land. Callahan didn't walk into a dining room. He occupied it. He devoured it. Trailing him were 2 young American associates, eager shadows dressed in dark suits, their nervous smiles betraying their fear of misstepping. But it was the 3 men who followed that turned heads and drew whispers. They were Japanese, late 50s to early 60s, their posture as precise as their dark suits. They carried themselves with a quiet weight that required no introduction. At their center was Mr. Takeda. His hair was silver, neatly combed, his expression carved from stone. His eyes, though, were alive, watchful, patient, absorbing everything around him with the calm intensity of a man who missed nothing. He did not swagger. He did not need to. Power settled on him as naturally as the evening air. The maitre d' rushed forward, bowing almost too low, his voice trembling as he greeted Callahan. He gestured toward the restaurant's crown jewel, the great circular booth with the sweeping view of the private garden. It was the kind of table whispered about by regulars, the one everyone wanted, the one waiters dreaded. Tonight, it belonged to Richard Callahan, and it belonged to Emily's section. The blood drained from her face. From across the dining room, Clara Hayes, her fellow waitress and closest friend, caught her eye. Clara's expression said everything without a word, half pity, half warning. Emily forced a tight smile in return, but her heart sank like a stone. As Callahan approached, the air seemed to bend around him. Conversations restarted only in hushed fragments, like people were afraid to speak too loudly in his presence. The kitchen doors swung slower, as if the entire building itself knew a predator had entered. When Callahan reached the table, he didn't look at Emily. He looked straight at Mr. Takeda and spoke loud enough for half the room to hear. "Takeda-san, you'll find no better place in New York than here. The best of everything for the best of partners." His voice was oily, too familiar, and every syllable carried the forced cheer of a man performing rather than conversing. Takeda gave a small, polite bow, his expression unreadable. Callahan grinned, sensing approval where there was none. "You know, I've always admired Japanese subtlety." He went on chuckling as if the line were a clever joke. "The way you people find meaning in the smallest things, I get it. I understand the art of it." Emily's stomach turned. To anyone else, it might have sounded like charm. But she could see the faint shift in Takeda's features, the almost imperceptible flicker in his associate's eyes. They exchanged the kind of look that carried volumes, discomfort, restraint, and perhaps a touch of disdain. Emily moved to the table with water glasses, her hands steady though her pulse raced. She placed them gently before the guests, bowing slightly. And in that brief moment, Takeda's eyes met hers. It wasn't a leer nor a glance of dismissal. It was sharper, evaluating, curious. For reasons she could not explain, the weight of that gaze made her more uneasy than Callahan's sneer. As she turned away, she felt Clara's eyes still on her from across the room. The silent plea, clear, hold steady, survive this. The problem was Richard Callahan had no intention of letting her survive quietly. Dinner at the Gilded Elm was never just a meal, it was theater. And tonight, Richard Callahan was determined to be both lead actor and director. He spoke too loudly, laughed too sharply, gestured too broadly, as if every glass of wine, every bite of food was another chance to prove his importance. The appetizers barely touched the table before the performance began. He boomed about a skyscraper rising on the west side, about a hostile takeover handled with elegance, about how his fortune was nothing more than the result of vision. His associates nodded like obedient puppets, their smiles brittle, their eyes darting constantly toward Mr. Takeda. Callahan treated each dish like a prop. He demanded the steak be refired because it was 2 degrees too rare. He swirled his glass of Bordeaux, sniffed it, and declared it hadn't breathed properly. He complained about the lighting, claiming a shadow crossed his plate. But his voice always carried just far enough for the room to hear an audience for his vanity. Emily moved in silence through his orbit, steady and precise. She bowed at the right moments, poured the champagne without spilling a drop, adjusted silverware, as if nothing could touch her composure. Inside, her stomach knotted, but outwardly, she was glass-clear, polished, untouchable. Callahan noticed. He didn't like it. He wanted to crack some flicker of annoyance, a slip of the hand. But Emily gave him nothing. Across the table, Mr. Takeda's eyes followed her movements. He saw her bow lower and more deliberate than most Americans attempted. He noticed her careful hands, how she aligned the glasses perfectly on the linen. Where Callahan saw a target to break, Takeda saw something else, discipline, grace, perhaps even dignity. Between courses, Callahan leaned in, trying to fill the silence with another boast. He raised his voice just enough. "You gentlemen know what makes this city great. The deal. The art of the deal. Nobody does it better than New York, and nobody does it better than me." Takeda gave a small nod. Neither agreement nor disagreement, his expression carved in stone. But Emily, clearing a nearby plate, heard something else. A quiet word spoken under his breath to his colleagues. Omotenashi. The syllables stirred something inside her. She knew the word well. In Japanese, it meant hospitality, but not the transactional kind. It was deeper, the spirit of anticipating a need before it was spoken of, serving with heart rather than obligation. She had studied it in Kyoto, admired it, even tried to live it. And hearing it now in this room while Callahan strutted and sneered struck her like a spark to dry kindling. Her chest tightened. Omotenashi. Callahan could never understand it. But she did. And Takeda's eyes told her he knew she did. She carried on in silence, her face unreadable. But inside she felt the first shift of something dangerous and unstoppable, like the earth beneath her feet beginning to tremble. The evening's final course arrived not on silver trays, but on what might as well have been pedestals. The waiters moved carefully, reverently, as though carrying treasure. The plates were set before Richard Callahan and his guests, and for a moment, even his loud voice fell quiet. The dessert was nothing short of art. A pale mousse infused with yuzu gleamed under soft light, resting on a delicate sponge of matcha green. At its center rose a sugar sculpture so fine it seemed impossible, an entire cherry blossom branch, translucent petals glimmering like they had been carved from glass. Gasps rippled through the room. Even Callahan's jaded associates leaned forward, eyes wide. But it was Mr. Takeda's reaction that mattered. He studied the dish with solemn reverence, the kind reserved for something that transcended food and entered the realm of meaning. "It is remarkable," he said softly, more to himself than anyone. Callahan's eyes glittered. He saw opportunity. His smirk spread cruel and deliberate, the smirk of a man who believed the world bent for his amusement. He turned not to the chef, but to Emily, who stood silently by with her tray. "Waitress," he said, voice dripping with condescension. The word fell heavy, stripping her of a name, a history, a self. "My guests are impressed. They value nuance. They need to understand the inspiration behind this art." He gestured toward the dessert with a flick of his fingers, as if swatting a fly. "Explain it to Mr. Takeda. Explain the symbolism of the flavors, the cherry blossoms, the balance of it all." Emily froze. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Callahan wasn't finished. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that carried like venom across the silent room. "Do it in Japanese? Let's see you fail." The words cracked like a whip. Around them, the dining room fell into an almost sacred silence. Forks rested midair. Diners held their breath. At the kitchen door, the staff had stilled their faces pale. Even Clara across the room covered her mouth with a trembling hand. It was the trap-perfect impossible. A waitress asked to speak not just of culinary philosophy, but in the language of the guests in front of them all. The stage was set for humiliation. Emily's throat went dry. She felt the weight of years pressing down, the humiliation she had endured, the slights she had swallowed, the debt that chained her, and the memory of her father's ruined publishing house, his legacy destroyed by men who looked and acted exactly like Richard Callahan. But in that crushing weight, something burned. A coal of anger, a spark of defiance. Instead of trembling, Emily straightened her back. The tray in her hands felt suddenly light. She turned not toward Callahan, but directly toward Mr. Takeda. Her gaze steadied, her chin lifted. The predator had laid his trap, but Emily Carter was about to step into the light. Emily did not look at Richard Callahan. She no longer even saw him. Instead, she turned her body fully toward Mr. Takeda, placed her tray aside, and lowered herself into a deep, formal bow. Not the shallow nod of a server trying to be polite, but a bow from the waist, her back straight, her hands pressed gently at her sides, the kind of bow that carried centuries of meaning. When she rose, the mask she had worn for 5 years was gone. Her eyes were clear, her posture unshaken. And then, in a voice steady as stone and smooth as water, she began to speak. The words were Japanese, fluent, flawless, exquisitely formal keigo. They flowed like music through the still air, carrying humility, respect, and a profound grace that went beyond mere translation. She began by apologizing for the presumption of speaking a formality so rare and so deeply respectful that even Takeda's 2 associates leaned forward in shock. Then she addressed him properly, Takeda-sama. The honorific landed like a note of perfect pitch, vibrating with meaning. Emily explained the yuzu, first describing its bright citrus as more than a flavor, an ancient winter solstice tradition in Japan, a symbol of cleansing and renewal. She spoke of how its brightness was meant to refresh not only the palate, but also the spirit. She moved to the matcha sponge, its bitter earthiness, its roots in the tea ceremony of Chanoyu. She spoke softly of harmony, purity, respect, and tranquility, the 4 virtues embodied in every careful whisk of powdered tea. The dessert, she explained, was not simply food. It was a bridge between 2 worlds. Finally, her voice lowered gentle as falling snow when she described the cherry blossoms crafted from sugar. Their beauty was breathtaking, yes, but fleeting. A symbol of no aware the awareness of impermanence, the poignant sadness in knowing all things must pass. And then she recited in flawless Japanese a haiku by Basho. Just 3 lines, simple and eternal. Her voice carried it into the silent air like a prayer. When she finished, she bowed again, letting the silence rest. No one moved. No fork scraped. No glass clinked. The entire dining room sat transfixed, suspended in awe. At the kitchen doors, waiters crowded together, their eyes wide, their mouths open. Diners at other tables craned their necks, drawn into the gravity of the moment. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their light a little longer, as if reluctant to disturb what had just been spoken. And then, slowly, Mr. Takeda rose. His chair pushed back with a sound that seemed thunderous in the silence. He placed his hands at his sides and returned her bow deep and deliberate. Gasps rippled through the room. When he straightened, his voice shifted into perfect, unaccented English, firm enough for every soul in the restaurant to hear. This young woman, he said, his eyes fixed not on Emily, but on Callahan, has shown more respect and wisdom in 5 minutes than you have shown in 5 weeks. Richard Callahan's face blanched, his smirk gone, his lips twitching in disbelief. The icy blue of his eyes dimmed as realization dawned. The billion-dollar deal he had paraded all evening was slipping like sand through his fingers. For the first time all night, the predator looked small. The silence inside the Gilded Elm broke not with applause, but with footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing across the marble floor. Mr. Takeda turned from Callahan, offered Emily one last respectful nod, and led his delegation toward the door. His 2 associates followed without a word. They did not finish their dessert. They did not shake hands. They simply left carrying with them the weight of a billion-dollar deal that had just crumbled to ash. The maitre d' froze in place, unsure whether to chase after them or hide. Callahan's young associates scrambled after Takeda, faces pale, their polished shoes skidding across the floor in desperation. But there was no stopping it. The door closed with a quiet thud that sounded like judgment. Richard Callahan remained behind, hunched in the grand circular booth that had once been a throne. The untouched dessert sat before him, the sugar cherry blossoms glimmering faintly, as though mocking him with their fragile, fleeting beauty. His hands twitched at his sides, but he couldn't lift his fork. For the first time, the man who conquered every room looked like a defeated figure swallowed by velvet shadows. The other diners whispered, their voices rising like a tide of disbelief. Some leaned toward one another, murmuring Emily's name. Others simply stared at Callahan, as though watching a king stripped bare. The predator had been unmasked, and he sat alone among the wreckage of his own arrogance. Emily's heart pounded as she slipped away from the center of the room. In the hallway near the service station, she found herself face to face with Mr. Takeda. He had lingered waiting. His expression softened. From his breast pocket, he withdrew a small black card case. With both hands, he presented her his card, bowing with formal respect. "This is not sympathy," he said gently. "This is recognition. My foundation seeks people who can bridge cultures, who understand respect as more than a word. I believe you are such a person. Call tomorrow." Her fingers trembled as she accepted the card. It felt heavy, as if the weight of her future had been pressed into its embossed lettering. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds of her small Brooklyn apartment. Emily sat at her kitchen table, the card before her, like a relic, her coffee forgotten. Her heart raced as she dialed the number. The voice on the other end already knew who she was. Mr. Takeda had spoken of her. He was expecting her. That afternoon, she walked through the quiet lobby of the Takeda Foundation offices on Park Avenue. No gaudy chandeliers, no velvet pomp, only clean lines, natural light, and the subtle fragrance of hinoki wood. A receptionist bowed and guided her upstairs. In a spacious office lined with shelves of books and ceramics, Mr. Takeda welcomed her with tea he poured himself. They spoke easily, not of resumes or titles, but of culture, of art, of the fragile threads that connect one soul to another. Then his expression shifted, thoughtful, almost tender. "You mentioned your father yesterday," he said. "Michael Carter, yes." Emily nodded, surprise flickering across her face. "I knew him," Takeda continued. He rose, walked to a shelf, and returned with a large volume bound in worn but beautiful cloth. He set it gently before her. On the cover was a ceramic bowl glazed in streaks of deep indigo and soft green. At the bottom of the cover, Carter Press. Her breath caught. It was her father's last great project, the book he had poured his soul into before the company collapsed. She ran her hand over the familiar lettering, tears rising in her eyes. "Your father's work was extraordinary," Takeda said. "My foundation supported his research. He believed art could be a bridge between worlds. He was a man of honor." Emily's tears spilled freely. His press, it was destroyed, bought out and gutted by a larger company. He never recovered. Takeda's eyes darkened. "I know. And I know the man responsible. One of his earliest conquests was Richard Callahan." The words struck Emily like lightning, illuminating every shadow of the past 5 years. The humiliation she had endured, the apron she had worn, the debt, the exhaustion, it had all begun with him. The man who tried to shatter her in front of the world was the same man who had crushed her father's legacy. The circle closed. It wasn't chance that placed her in that room. It was destiny. Emily sat in stunned silence, the weight of truth settling over her. Yet within it, she felt something shift, grief giving way to vindication, exhaustion to renewal. Her stand against Callahan had not only defended her dignity, it had defended her father's memory. For the first time in years, she felt whole. That night, when the final check was tallied and the whispers had quieted into memory, Emily Carter untied her apron for the last time. She folded it neatly, laid it on the counter, and felt the weight of 5 long years slip from her shoulders. The cotton no longer bound her. It was just fabric now. No longer debt, no longer humiliation, no longer a chain. She stepped out the service door of the Gilded Elm and into the cool Manhattan night. The city air, once heavy with exhaustion and dread, now felt electric alive, filled with possibility. Streetlights shimmered against wet pavement taxis, honked in the distance. And for the first time in years, she looked at it all and saw promise instead of punishment. Behind her, another figure emerged from the shadows. Richard Callahan. His stride, once a conqueror's march, was gone. His shoulders hunched, his expensive suit sagged, as if even the fabric had given up on him. He moved stiffly, almost aimlessly, eyes downcast, refusing to meet the gaze of anyone who recognized him. The Titan had fallen, and he slipped away into the darkness of the city like a ghost of his former self. Emily did not watch him go. She had no need. His chapter was finished. Hers was only beginning. The next morning, she accepted Mr. Takeda's offer, not as an escape, but as a calling. Her father's voice echoed in her memory art as a bridge beauty, as a bond between souls. Now she would carry that torch, not just for him, but for herself, for all the years she had spent invisible, and for every person who had ever been dismissed by those who mistook cruelty for power. Standing at the edge of Central Park later that week, Emily looked up at the Manhattan skyline. Once those towers had loomed like walls obstacles too high to climb. Now they stretched like open doors, horizons of opportunity. She felt taller, steadier, as though the city itself had shifted to meet her stride. And in that quiet moment, a lesson crystallized. Our worth is never measured by a title stitched to a uniform or by the assumptions of the powerful. It lives in the quiet dignity we carry, in the strength to endure, and in the bridges we dare to build. True strength is not found in humiliating others. It's found in standing tall with grace when the world tries to bend you low. Her story reminds us sometimes the smallest voices can change the course of giants. If Emily's journey moved you, if it reminded you of the power of respect, dignity, and hidden strength, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Leave your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear your voice. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and stay with us. Because in a world full of noise, stories like these prove that even the quietest light can outshine the darkest shadow.